So thank you all for being here, and particularly to the panelists. So this is what we call the hallway conversations, with the idea that there's a lot about being an academic scientist that you don't learn before you start in the job. And so this is meant to be conversations about the kind of things that you learn from colleagues by talking to colleagues, whether it be visiting them in their office or hallways or lunch rooms, back when we got together in lunch rooms. So the topic this time is getting you and your trainees published. And I'll start by asking each of the panelists to just briefly introduce themselves and maybe tell us something about yourself that others might not know. So Eli, if you would start.
Oh, that not know thing is the hard part. Let's see. So my name is Eli Chapman, and I was just promoted to full professor. I'm in the College of Pharmacy, so I was promoted I don't know, days ago, literally. So I'm in the College of Pharmacy. I'm in the Pharmacology and Toxicology Department in Drug Discovery and Development. There's probably lots of things that you don't know about me. I don't know a lot of you, but I'll tell you this thing about me. I used to fish a lot with Michael Marty.
Oh, cool.
Michael Marty and my son and I used to go fishing quite a bit. And then I think we both got too busy or something. Anyway, that's enough out of me.
Very cool. I have to ask, what was it, fly fishing?
No,
Okay.
no, just yeah, we were just fishing up in one of the little lake up in the Mount Lemon.
Wonderful. Okay, well, maybe Michael, have you introduce yourself since he sort of gave a segue to you.
So I'm Michael Marty. I'm an associate professor here in chemistry and biochemistry. And yeah, my little known fact was going to be that I like to go fishing with Eli. COVID sort of put a dent in that, so we'll have to get back to it this summer now that it's getting warm again.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And
yeah, so my name is Ann Kress. I'm a professor in cellular molecular medicine, and I really enjoy mentoring students and having an active research lab. I also have some administrative responsibilities, which take me away from the lab more than I would like. But I think maybe the thing that shocks people the most is that about me is that I do have an outside life. I do love to do things other than be at the cancer center. So what I like to do is I'm actually a scuba diver, and I really do a lot of macro photography, and a couple of my photographs have been on the cover of IMBO. So I'm very proud of that, and that's something my husband and I were doing together.
fantastic. Have to
Yeah,
see
it's not fishing, it's just swimming with them,
So there's a fish. We have a common theme.
There's a fish, there's a common theme here,
I like it.
Maybe because we're in the desert, we like water.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now I'll start with questions, and I'm going to start with sort of a big picture. If you had 20 seconds to give advice on getting published, what would it be? And I'll have whoever would like to start.
I can start. I mean, I guess we can keep the order the same. So you sent these questions a while ago, and I thought about this a lot and never came up with a really good answer. But I think that's a very hard question. But I think the important thing for me when I was first starting was getting my students motivated, and I think that can be quite a challenge. But getting them excited about their science and working hard, and wanting to be in the lab, and wanting to do experiments. I think that was the critical element for me, was getting them very excited and motivated.
Great.
Yeah, I think for me, my 20-second advice would be that you have to find the right balance between getting the best paper out that you can and getting the paper out. Because you could always do more experiments and you could always try and make it better. But at a certain point in time, you have to just call it quits, put it together, and send out something that is good, but maybe not 100% finished or 100% perfect. And just accept that, like, getting it out is a real milestone, and that's the important contribution, is communicating what you've done not necessarily making like the most perfect story. So I think I see a lot of people that like wait way too long to start writing, wait way too long to start thinking about the paper. I think just starting earlier and trying to get it out sooner it helps.
Great. Anne?
Yeah, so I actually agree 100% with everything that's been said already, especially the don't wait part. That's really important. I think my 20 seconds would be just make sure that you have a really good science, a scientific question that you've been asking and answering. So that means a lot of work with your mentor to hone that, and then have a very clear story. So something that people can understand, because as I see now more and more that people go to graphical abstracts, they're doing a lot of visuals now to understand, even in the high impact journals. So really need to have a clear story, and you do that by sharing it with your colleagues before you try to publish it. So I think just communicating and talking to people about your work really helps.
So Anne, it sounds to me like you almost have started or given an answer to my next question, is sort of at what point in the process are you integrating planning research and planning papers? So sort of when do you start thinking about the research that you're planning? How is it going to fit in a paper?
Yeah, I think from the student point of view, you're basically, if you're presenting it all the time, that progress that you have in your project, you can go where the data leads you, right? And you never know, because that's why you're doing the research. You don't really know what the answer is. So when you're testing between hypotheses, I think you really need to hone in with your colleagues and with your mentor to make sure that when you know that you've gotten a story or you've gotten something that will be, that's what your mentors are there for, to tell you, where in the field your work is sitting and what you can contribute. So having a really good communication with your mentor is really key. And if for some reason that's not working, or you want other people to be involved, it's your committee members. They all know what you're doing and they will help you. So don't be shy to reach out.
Good answer. Eli or Michael, do you want to add to that? Any other thoughts?
My PhD supervisor had this phrase of turning over rocks. And so I often think of experiments as kind of like three phases of like, you start by just turning over rocks and seeing like what the scope of the space is and like where you want to try exploring things. And then in the middle is sort of the well-planned and well-executed stage of collecting publishable data and like really sitting down and saying, I'm going to go through and test these things all systematically. And then at the end is sort of the cleanup phase where it's like, okay, we've seen this interesting, weird thing. Like what things in that initial data set do we need to go back and sort of follow up with? So I think that's kind of, I try and talk my students into sort of thinking about those three sort of phases of just scoping out the space, really defining your scope of your paper, and then getting all that final data to really nail down the story.
Right.
So I think I take the same approach. I don't ever call it turning over rocks, but what I actually do is, so my students will present their data every week. And what I really like to do is and this is part of motivating them too. I feel like they get really excited when this happens, is I will say, oh, that's a really great result. That's incredible. I think that that's something that we can start thinking about publishing. And I will have them mock up the figures that they see in a paper and then present that to the group. And so they'd actually go to the whiteboard and they draw a little box and tell me what's going to be in the box and sort of lay it out. And I do that with them pretty early on. And the reason I do that is it's not so much that's necessarily going to be the paper, but it's more they get excited, they start to see where the story is going. And then it's also to teach them kind of the idea of story. Like it needs to kind of tell a story. There has to be a compelling reason why you're going to do these things. And then that I feel helps focus them, and it guides that cleanup that Michael was talking about, because it's really fun to make the initial discovery for students, and they hate doing you know, like, well, we already know that that's true. Why do I have to do that experiment? Well, because the reviewer is going to ask for that experiment. That's why you got to, right? Like they don't like that. And so, but I think that I found that this method focuses them towards that and allows them to think more deeply about and critically about what reviewers might want and that sort of thing. So it's the same method as Michael was describing. I just call it a little differently, I suppose.
Sounds good. So when you're at the stage of planning experiments, do you ever work with your students to think about what's the data going to look like, and maybe you want to do some different kind of experiments to get data that maybe paints a good story or tells a good story across? Is that something you do?
Yes,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's something you have to do, because you never know what the answer is going to be. And then when you look at it, you have different analytical tools, you know, different ways of looking at the same kind of data. And I think that's where the student can come in with their different perspective they might have. And other people in your group will have different perspectives. And they all look at things slightly differently, whether it's a violin plot or whether it's a, you know, circos plot or what, you know, whatever kind of tool you want to use, but you use different ones and you'll see different things in the same data.
Absolutely.
Kind of the cascade of the scientific method too, is like you collect some data and you interpret the results, but that sort of leads you to develop a new model or a new hypothesis, which then you can then say, all right, how do we test this? And what level of data do we need to sort of validate that hypothesis? And that's where the question then becomes, do you split that into a separate paper, or do you quickly do those experiments so that you can kind of confirm that and put it into one story? Just depends how hard that is.
So that was a beautiful segue to the next question of, when do you decide it's time to publish? What do you use kind of as your decision making for that?
Well, I basically do it with the group and thinking about the story and thinking about what the data is telling us and what we can actually conclude. You know, we make inferences for things and what we can actually conclude. And usually it's an iterative thing, as everybody said. You know, you basically have your groups and you look at it weekly, you know, and the story sort of evolves. So, you know, at some stage where you can actually state with confidence that you have a certain observation and you've confirmed it several different ways, then you're ready to tell it to other people and let other people use that information for their own work.
I think this is the critical point that Michael was talking about too, where you can go on forever. There's that you can literally think of a billion experiments, and you can try to second guess reviewers forever. But I think that I feel like that, especially early on in my career, I tried to avoid that. I wanted to, you know, I needed papers, I needed to get things out there, get my name out there a little bit. So, you know, there were times when I knew maybe, okay, there's an experiment that would be really nice in this paper. It's going to be a really hard experiment. It's going to take a really long time. Let's send this in and continue to work on that. And if we need that, we'll put it in. If not, it'll be another paper, right? If the reviewers don't want that, maybe we could write another paper on that. But I think it was really scary for me. My first paper that I sent in with, like, you know, my own name on it and the little stars on my name was pretty terrifying, to be honest. And you just feel like you're probably wrong. I don't know. I had this feeling like maybe somebody's going to find a flaw, and it was really scary for me. But you got to just do it. You got to just jump into the deep end and go for it. And it's hard. It is hard. But
in hindsight, did you decide you had made the right decision, that the timing was right when you sent it in?
You know, not always, actually. So I would, to be very honest about it, there's some papers that I look back on and I think, you know, I probably could have gone to a higher journal if I'd done a couple of extra things. I wouldn't say I regret it exactly, but I definitely, you know, I get sort of nervous. I'd hear that somebody else is working on something and I'd push it out. Sometimes I feel a little bit prematurely, but that's really the beauty of tenure, actually, because after you get tenure, you don't do that anymore. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but that really is what happened to me. Is after tenure, I'm like, I'm not going to push out a paper until I'm really happy with it. So I definitely changed my style a little bit, but yeah, sometimes I do feel like I made a premature decision, that for sure.
Yeah. Now, Anne or Michael, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I have to say that in my experience, I'm pretty much 50-50 for what I, can guess what the reviewers want, so sometimes I think that I know, and so, I have an extra experiment in my pocket, and then half the time they don't even ask for it. So, I guess, I would say that, you just want to have a complete story, you want to have something that you're confident of that's really real and that you've confirmed it and you've used multiple different, tests, whatever it is, to make sure that the data is correct and the observation is correct or the concept is correct, and then you're ready. And I think helping early on, as everybody said, starting very early with the students, because often they can say, well, why am I not putting my stuff out there? I've already done this one great experiment, and you go, well, sorry, but it's more, it takes more than that, right? So, yeah.
I'll just add one thing, and that is that there are sometimes non-scientific factors that come into play, like Eli kind of mentioned, worrying about other people working in the same space. But I think a big thing is like the trainee schedule. So like I just had 2 students defend this week, and there's definitely one of those papers where we're just sort of wrapping it up. There's a lot more we could do, but it's like the student's going to be leaving and we just kind of have to put it together. And I think it's going to be a nice paper in its current form, but like sometimes you have to also take into account the fact that students aren't here forever, and like they also need to be getting papers out in a timely manner. And so sometimes you just have to kind of do the best with what you got and send it in.
Yeah.
I'm going to add one thing to that that's probably super obvious. I don't mean to state the obvious, but Anne made me think of this. The thing that really matters are your data. Like, you might not draw the correct conclusion from your data, but if your data are solid, somebody might say, hey, I think there's another conclusion. That's fine. But just the data are really what matters. You have to be certain about every piece of data that you put in your paper, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely correct. Because a lot of people, you yourself probably go to other people's papers and say, oh, look, they observed this 10 years ago, but they didn't understand what it was, or they didn't put it in the right context. And we have different contexts now, so now we understand it. And
I've done that to myself.
yeah, exactly.
Yep. Yes.
And
yes.
Don't trust that guy. It's bad.
I will say that I also ask the students to put data in their dissertations, which may or may not be in their papers, but limit it to the data that they may not understand yet, but they know that it's really good. Because most of the time we follow up on that data. And especially if it's really good and they know that it's good and they know it's not some kind of fluke or some kind of artifact, we really value that. And so I actually make sure that students, if I use that data, then they're on that paper as it moves forward, even if they've left the lab, because they did it while they were in my lab. So
I'll maybe add one other quick thing, and that is like thinking about this paper that we're working on at the moment. Like, one of the reasons that we're getting it out now in its current form, rather than waiting to do a ton more experiments, is there's already a ton of data in it. And like reviewers can only absorb so much. And so I think sometimes I was part of a paper once that had something like 96 figure panels, and it was just like
oh,
way
my
too
goodness.
much. And so sometimes you just have to sort of wrap things up into a manageable size rather than doing a manifesto, which I think it's hard to read,
So the next question is, at what point in the process do you decide on your target journal?
After your higher target journal rejects you.
Yeah. I always have an A, B, and C. I have an A, B, and C plan usually. But where in the process, I think it's usually when you've basically got a pretty clear idea of what the story is, and you know that the data is really good, and now you're trying to figure out, okay, where can I get what audience do I want to go for? What does the work, who will the work benefit the most, and where will I get the best feedback? Because it's not necessarily review, but, and trying to slip it in or something, but you want to really give it to the experts that know that area.
So I'll
'Cause in
add,
the-
Eli was talking
Go.
about things that changed post tenure. One of the things that for me changed post tenure is I quit really caring about where I sent papers. And I basically send everything to ACS journals. I just pick the topic that I think is most relevant. And I send it there because I know it's going to get reviewed quickly. It's going to go to the right people, and I don't have to pay for it. Like, I got it, like, I think it was our collaborators wanted to send something to a journal, and it was going to cost like $4,000 to submit. And I was like, I just can't do that. So I try and send it to journals that I know it's going to get reviewed well at, that it's going to be cheap. And I just sort of quit trying to look all over and just stick with one family that I feel comfortable with.
I've sort of found what happens to me is usually in group meeting, a student will present a piece of data that gets me really excited. And I'm immediately thinking nature. Like that's the nature, right? And then I calm down and I think about it more clearly. And what I try to do is sit with the students and sort of talk through. I will always involve the students in the decision, so I will say, these are some of the journals I'm thinking of. What are some of the journals you're thinking of? And then we discuss why we'd go to a specific journal. And it comes down to really what Anne was saying. It's a decision about who you want to see it, who you want to review it, because the different journals are going to give you very different reviews. You're going to have very different experts. And like Michael as well, I try to kind of stay in my society. So my area is med chem. So I really want to move things into like the Journal of Medicinal Chemistry, because it's where my society is going to see things, where people in my field are going to see it. So I really think a lot about that. And especially when I was coming up, because I'm going to need letters, right, for my tenure package. And so I want people in my field to know who I am and what I'm doing. So that was kind of how I made the decision. But I do try to include my students in it. I want them to be a part of that process, and I take their input very seriously. And there's been a couple of times where I've had students that were a little more senior who wanted to shoot for a pretty big journal that I didn't think the paper was really qualified for, but I would do it anyway. I've done that with a couple of my students where I said, I think this has a very low chance of getting in. It's not really the kind of thing they like, but we can do it if you want to write it in that style. And we'd write the paper in that style. And that's never worked. It's never worked out, but I think it was a great process. And we've had some really good reviews and good suggestions and improved our papers as a result of sending them to some of those journals. So I don't think it's I think it's a worthwhile process.
Maybe if I could just ask you to think back when you first started out. So were you already in the societies that you sort of knew that was the target audience, or did you gravitate to a society because it was the field that you were in? Sort of when you first began, sort of how were you thinking about which?
That's exactly what I was thinking was this is the field that I'm in, so there were certain journals that were in my field, and there are a couple of tiers, right? So there's sort of the top in my society would be the Journal of Medicinal Chemistry, and then the sort of ACS chemical biology, cell chemical biology, these kinds of journals that are sort of drug discovery, chemical biology type journals. So I was always kind of thinking around those journals and who would see them in my field.
Yeah, for me, it's like a really good paper will go to the Journal of the American Chemical Society, and then like a step below is like analytical chemistry, and a step below is like Journal of the American Society for Mass Spectrometry, and they're all within the same family. So in theory, you could submit the one and just kick down, but typically we've been pretty good about getting it in where we think it's going to go. But
and next, Anne, did you have want to add?
Well, I'm just trying to think back. How far back do you want me to think? I mean, when I was, a student, I obviously I just depended on my mentors to tell me, and I knew that I was working in cancer research. So, there's, again, it's back to the field, but I think now, as an assistant professor, I was really more interested in getting feedback, and building a network. And so I would go to the AACR journals, to make sure that it got out there so people knew who I was. And then a little later, I guess I basically just decided I really want to make sure that I get a really great, feedback from everyone. And I've really gotten some really good suggestions that really helped the work and drove me in a way that I wouldn't have gone before.
That's
But
great.
they put it together and they made a compelling case. So I went, wow, that's a good idea. So you can get some really good ideas from reviewers, despite, our usual jokes about the reviewer number 3, who you want to kill. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Have you ever done pre-submission inquiries where you reach out to an editor and ask if it's appropriate for their audience? Is that a tactic you've used?
Oh yeah, I've done that. Yeah, I've done that and been, trounced because of it. But it tests your resiliency, I think. So
Okay.
but it was actually, it did help me, focus what I was doing, to realize, what I could do and what I couldn't do. So it worked out.
Would you recommend that as a strategy?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is they say no, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I only did it
Usually
once.
there's a very quick turnaround too, if they want,
I did it once in a very weird scenario. So I had a paper that I sent out to PNAS. It was a very controversial paper, so upending like decades of research.
Mhm.
And it got reviewed and then just totally trashed. But at the same time, it got reviewed through this open peer review process where somebody saw it on bioRxiv and coordinated a peer review of the preprint. And so we ended up with like 7 reviewer comments sets from these
Oh
2.
my goodness.
And part of it had been done through this entirely open preprint process. So we went through the process of addressing all the reviews, and then on the bioRxiv posting all the all the response to the reviewers and revising the paper in the preprint format. So basically then the person who coordinated the preprint review had signed off on it and said they've addressed all the comments. And so we basically had a fully reviewed paper with no journal to go to. And so that's where I kind of reach out and I said, hey, we have this paper, it's gone through this open review process. Would you take it? And in the end, it went back to the same analytical chemistry journal I would have sent it to probably at the beginning had I not tried so hard. It was a long process.
Interesting.
I had a paper that was reviewed, went through 2 rounds of revisions at a pretty high level journal and then was ultimately rejected. And so I didn't exactly do a pre-publication inquiry, but what I did is similar to what Michael was saying. I sent it to another journal with those reviews to the editor and said, hey, this is reviewed multiple times at this journal. Would you be interested in this paper? And that was actually very beneficial. It went very quickly. They reviewed it very quickly and got it published very quickly. So that was a useful experience.
That was a good strategy. Yeah. So that sort of segues again into the next question of advice on how to navigate the review system or review process.
So this is probably obvious to everyone but me. Or when you're starting out, it is not an antagonistic process. They are not attacking you. They're not attacking you as a person. They're sometimes their comments can seem a little bit harsh, but I used to take them very personally. And I've had a couple of rebuttals that were not very accommodating and not very borderline not polite. That is not a good approach. So for me in the review process, now I think of it as, really as an opportunity. Anne had said this actually, that it's an opportunity to get ideas, to new experimental ideas, new interpretive ideas. So I try to this is hard actually, I think, but I try to like sort of put my ego aside and just believe that their interest is in making my paper the best that it can be. So I try to be very polite in my rebuttals. I almost always, I won't necessarily do every single thing that they ask for. There are times when I don't agree with something, but I'll be very polite in saying, I don't agree with this, and here's why. Here's some supporting papers that argue for my case. But I'm never antagonistic. I never found that to be a very useful approach. I tried it more than once. I'd get angry and I'd write something that was a little controversial, not controversial, but a little contrarian or aggressive. It's not good. It doesn't help anything. So I try to just believe that they really have my best interest at heart and want to make this a better paper.
Well, I think to the point that you just talked about, the emotional part of it. I mean, I basically, have to manage that by, I have to put it away for a while and then go back at some other stage. Otherwise, it's very difficult, especially if it's really an exciting thing to you and you've put a lot of effort in. You sort of hear these comments, and some of them may actually be wrong. I mean, they're just people's opinions. And so you really have to take that into consideration. So I usually either put it away for a little while, or I go and I talk to other people and show the reviews to other people. So I think that's the important part of getting a rejection of any kind, is to not really think of it as a failure, but think of it as something you need to improve and fix, rather than hiding it or not showing it to people. I mean, that's really the bad part of the review process. You can take it personally. People can think of it as failures. In the dim times in the past, way past, people would actually use it as a way to find out if your work was any good or not. And and so that's the kind of thing which I think we're well past now, I think. But it's really better to show that to a lot of other colleagues that you have, and at whatever stage you're in, to get their input, and then you can make an informed decision on how to make it better, as long as you're very persistent.
Yeah, I think I'm getting better, but I always still get nervous when I read the first round of reviews. So I have to skip it and then put it away for a while. And the way I do that now is I send it to my students and say, all right, start formatting the response, and like the easy things start taken care of. And then the things that are hard, start marking them. I don't know how to answer this or things like that. But I agree with what Anne and Eli both said, that I think a lot of it, for me, I kind of look at it up as an opportunity, even if I don't agree with the comment or often I don't understand the comment, like it highlights a spot where I've not clearly explained it. And so it's a place that you can be like, okay, well, they didn't understand this. Let me go back and clarify that. So
I think what's really important, Margaret, is people to realize that they are people's opinions that you're getting, and that sometimes you have to interpret what they are actually talking about and what they mean when they're giving you an opinion. So I often also look to make sure that whatever review I'm getting, whether it's my grant or my paper or whatever it is, if it's a balanced review, so in other words, they're telling me the strengths and the weaknesses, then I'm basically saying, okay, I'm going to pay a lot of attention to this one. And if it's somebody that's just rattling on, some kind of, bunch of, you got to do this in 5 cell lines, and, I don't know, something mindless, well, I put that away, So you can interpret. And I think for a student or for a postdoc or whatever, I mean, using your colleagues that have a little more experience will really help you.
Yeah. So Anne and Eli, Michael talked a little bit about engaging trainees, but do you want to talk about how you engage your trainees in the review process?
Yeah, I basically do what Michael does, and this changes. So this is an evolution. Early on, I was more inclined to write the papers, write the
Mm.
letter, the letter of introduction, write all the rebuttal letters. And I don't know why I did that. Maybe it was just I was nervous and felt it would be faster and get more papers this way. Now I don't do that. I write the papers with them. We write it collaboratively. It's usually they write it and then I destroy it, and then they write it and I destroy it, and they write it and I destroy it. And this goes on for a while until it's where until it ends up where I want it to be anyway. But in the review process, I absolutely do exactly what Michael just said. I have them write the rebuttal because I want them to think about, what are, these kinds of things. I want them to get used to it. Me personally, my hope is that all my students are going to be professors, which is obviously not going to happen, but it's just kind of what I think. So I want them to be prepared for that process. So I have them, write a rebuttal, and then we'll usually go through the comments together, looking at their comments on it. And, and we'll say, well, are you sure this is what they were, meaning to say? And sometimes we won't really, like Michael was saying, we won't really understand what they were saying. But I involve them in the entire process. And one thing I have, and this is very important to me, or has been very important for me, is that, I've always got a bunch of things going on and all my students are doing something different. This is way more personal to them than it is to me at this stage. So I absolutely, I don't send them the reviews without being there to kind of say, okay, I just sent you the reviews. Let's, don't get upset about it. Let's talk about it. Like I always I try and soften that blow, because for them, it can be very painful, I've found, and they can take it very personally, and it can cause them. I think it's really like, I felt at times like it's psychologically damaging for them almost, because they're not used to that sort of criticism. So I never send it to them and then just be like, well, have a good weekend. I will always send it to them and like go in the lab, sit down with them, say, hey, some of these are, they're mixed. It's a mixed bag. Don't take it personally. We'll address it. And I try to sort of give them a pep talk, I guess, is like, for lack of a better word, to make sure that it doesn't affect them adversely.
Yeah.
And I found that to be very important. It's really, unless they're like great reviews and they, publish without changing. That never happens, right? That's so rare that I generally have to give them kind of a pep talk and help them through the pain, the kind of sting they're going to feel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important because the interpretation of what the reviews mean really sometimes take, the trainee or student might go, they just hated it and they thought it was terrible and, my life is over kind of thing. And, you basically go, no, wait a second. It's actually very fixable,
Yep.
So
Yep.
try to tell them it's very fixable, but I want you to go through it and, see where you can fix it. And they just need that context, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree completely.
Yeah. Part of just learning process and
Yeah.
and what the enterprise is like.
Mm.
Be all stuff.
I noticed the other people on the panel, or other people in the Zoom are faculty members. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
They really haven't much experience.
Does anyone else have a question you want to ask?
I have a question that I'd like to ask. So just something very relevant to me this week. I've been doing more and more papers that are collaborative papers with other PIs and things like that. And I guess one of the questions I have is, how do you balance sort of the timeframes and the expectations on that? Like this week sent out or I guess last week I sent out a paper to our collaborators, and I'm kind of expecting it's going to take them 2 or 3 weeks for everybody to get back to me, right? And conversely, this week, like Monday, I got a paper from a collaborator that they're ready to send in. And I'm like, look, this week is a crazy busy week for me. I'm traveling all next week. I'll get to it the week after. And he's like, we really want to submit next week. Like, try and get it done, try and get it done, try and get it done. I'm like, look, that's just not going to happen. Like I have this cancer center panel and all kinds of big stuff going on. So, how do you balance that sort of in both directions as sort of the lead collaborator and the following collaborator? Like, the expectations and what's reasonable. Is it crazy that I'm not able to get to this paper this week, and am I really hurting them by delaying it a week and a half?
No, that happens all the time, I think. I basically, if I'm really pushed for time, like I'm on a study section, or I know, I know that there's no way I'm going to get to it. I usually send them an email and say, can you just highlight the areas that you really want me to focus on? And I could do that, but I can't look at the whole paper. And if I'm a middle author somewhere, I mean, there's probably something that I'm doing that is very specific in there, and so they want me to check a legend or the interpretation of the data that's associated with that figure or something. That's how I manage it, because you don't want to slow your colleagues down, but at the same time you can't spend a lot of, you can't really do it justice for the whole thing, and they need to know that. So that's how I handle it.
Yeah, I've never, I mean, I don't know that I've really faced that. I mean, I have one collaborator who always wants everything done yesterday. And I know that that's how she is. I mean, she's going to want it. She's going to send me the paper and she's going to expect it back by like the end of the day. Right. And so I'm always prepared for that. And I will almost always accommodate that. And if I know that that's coming and I'm not going to be able to, I'll just send her an email beforehand and I'll say, look, if you need to send this out, you can send it out. This is my part of it. I wrote this part of it. I'm okay with, I'm comfortable with it as is, and just let it go at that. But generally when I'm writing papers with her, I just know her personality. And so I'm like, okay, I'll set aside this amount of time and I'll get this done. But yeah, it can be where I have the bigger problem is in the other direction. If I send them something and they insist on, like, especially if they insist on reading it and checking it, and then 4 weeks later they haven't responded, that makes me crazy.
I feel like 2 weeks is reasonable, right? Like, that's fine.
Yeah, I feel like 2 days is reasonable. I get a little impatient about it. So I understand. I think that's why I understand my collaborator who wants me to do it that day. I'm like, I'm kind of the same way, especially if it's something I'm really excited about. But yeah, 2 weeks is probably more reasonable than my opinion.
Yeah.
What I think.
I'm going to take just a minute and say that we like to get feedback from these. So Amanda is going to post a link in the chat that goes to just an evaluation and ask for suggestions for how we can improve it. So before you step off, if you would please help us by filling out the evaluation. Was there anybody else who wanted to ask a question? So I have one more, and if you had advice on, do you use, Jonathan, did you have a question?
Yes, one question, and obviously this is more for students. What do you think about the opportunities to pay for papers to be published?
I'll jump in because I have very strong feelings about this. I think it is a bad system that unfortunately is slipping more. We're slipping more and more into it. Like, I see more and more journals going fully open access, which sounds like a good thing, but then, and if it were like $100 per paper, that would be fine. But this sort of like $1,000, $2,000, $4,000, $10,000 per paper, it's just crazy. Like, so I'm a big fan of putting everything on preprint first so that it is open access and people can read it even if they don't subscribe to the journal. And then publishing in journals that don't make me pay. So I've pretty committed to that model of every paper goes on a bioarchive or chem archive and then submit it to a journal that's not going to make me pay for it. But that's
Thank
also
you.
so,
one thing that makes me crazy, Jonathan, about that is they asked me to review for them for free, and then they're charging $4,000. I'm like, wait, what? I feel like I should, I want to cut like that. That makes me crazy about the open access system, right? I mean, it's a money generating system, and yet they're still getting people to review. So I will not review for open access journals in most cases. It's very rare that I will. And I have published some papers. There's certain journals that you know, that I think I believe in a little more than others. And I have done it on occasion, but again, yeah, like Michael, it's pretty rare for me to publish in open access like that, because I'm just very suspicious of them, I think is what it is. I just feel like asking people to review for free when you're making, you know, when you're a money generating, it's just that seems so unethical to me. And there's, you know, there's probably lots of senior level grad students and postdocs that could really benefit from a little bit of extra cash reviewing for these journals, you know, and would help their career as well. And I don't know, that's my that's my problem with them, I think, more than anything.
I appreciate this feedback. Dr. Kress?
Well, I don't like to pay for things either, you know. And I think it's pretty crazy when you have to pay for color, you know, in this digital world, you know. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. I think I try to really avoid, I do the same thing. I try to avoid the journals that I know are just, you know, asking for money for, you know, either for submission or for review, or, you know, I just avoid them. I also don't like the predatory journals, the ones that I get, all the little, you know, please, you know, we invite you to come to this, you know, collection, blah, blah, blah. But by the way, you got to pay $4,000 up front, you know. I mean, there's just so much of that. It's unbelievable. So I think sticking within your, you know, I just don't go for it, to be honest. I mean, I know that I can put all my stuff online where people can actually, it's free access, people can see it. So I don't really need to play that game.
Yeah, that's been a big shift for me too in the last few years of like maybe 2 or 3 years ago was my first thing. I put it on a preprint server. And then I was like,
Yeah.
that's not hard. Why don't I do this for everything? So yeah, I now put everything up. Only occasionally will I hold something back. And more, that's mostly because of like a lack of self-confidence. If I don't feel like, if I don't know how it's going to get received or something, maybe I won't post it. But that's like one paper in the last 3 years or something.
Yeah. So I mean, I do that with my ORCID, you know, to post things. I also post at the library. The library asks for those things too. And then I use the NCBI, you know, bibliography as a way to do that as well. So
Thank you.
So I think maybe again, you touched a little bit on one more question of using recent publications for just promoting your science. And so besides making it publicly available, are there other strategies that you use to get the word out about that paper?
Oh, I think a lot of some of my papers have been out on social media, you know, and on LinkedIn and social media. It's not really by me. It's usually by the students, or the people that are on there, or when it gets presented at a national meeting. So those are really clear ways that are different than just publication to get the word out about your work.
I think one of the best things that I've found in that way, I don't use social media. I don't do anything like that. I don't actively promote anything. I've never intentionally promoted anything, but I've unintentionally promoted things. So the place I've found that I enjoy the most are Gordon research conferences. So when I go to a Gordon conference, the spirit of the Gordon is to present unpublished data, and they have lots of rules about what you can, you know, that you can't take photographs, you can't do all this stuff because things are unpublished. And I get incredible input there. And, you know, especially if I have a poster and people come up and they look at it and talk about it. And I get really, I've found Gordon conferences, and probably, you know, FASEB and some of the other conferences as well, depending on your societies. But I've just found Gordons are really good for kind of promoting a paper in a sense. I don't, again, it's not intentional, but you know, you'll give a talk, or you'll present a poster, and it's something that's going to be published, you know, or not. I mean, I've had things that I've presented at those conferences, and because they're not vetted as well, you know, some of them have never seen publication because it just never panned out. But that's a way that I've found to be just really outstanding and get really good input from you know, a lot of really interesting people.
For a while, we had a really vibrant Mass Spec Twitter community. It's gone downhill a bit over the last year as Twitter got bought out, but I still post things and yeah.
Have you ever sort of reached out to a colleague and said, I just published this, and it sort of becomes an avenue for an invitation to give a talk?
No.
Had other people do that to me and I get really kind of annoyed, you know.
Okay.
You know, but because I'm usually following them anyway, you know.
Yeah.
The people that I know that really do outstanding work in the area that I'm in, I'm following them anyway. Either with my Gmail, Google, follow Google Scholar, following them, and then they give me alerts when they publish something. So
I will sometimes send things out if I like Eli, I really like to present unpublished stuff. So even if I'm doing like a departmental seminar somewhere or a conference seminar, I always include a good portion of unpublished stuff because I love the feedback. But it's sometimes I'll meet people on those visits or at the seminars where like they'll be interested in the results. And so sometimes I'll follow up and say, hey, we finally got this up on the archive. Like, here's the paper, check it out. But more like people I've connected with that have expressed interest in it when it's still unpublished.
Yeah, I've only done that. If somebody asks me about some work that I have, or sometimes people will contact me and want a paper or want something, and then I'll send it to them. But I've never like sent it to someone. I've had just recently. This is really sad. I actually had a pretty good friend of mine contact me and tell me that I didn't reference him in a paper that I wrote, and then. And it was really embarrassing because it was probably the work closest to the work, and I missed it somehow.
I've done that too.
It was horrible. It was like the worst feeling. You just feel like you got kicked in the stomach when that happened. It was terrible. So, but yeah, generally I've had people send me papers before that I like kind of out of the blue that you don't really know that well, and you're always like, oh, that's odd. Like maybe not even in my field. I'm like, why are they sending me this paper? So I tend not to do that to people, really.
Okay. Final, maybe quick answers to advice on when should you start looking to be a reviewer? Where in your career?
So, so I was lucky. Even when I was a graduate student, my advisor would have me review papers and write critiques, and that was an incredibly useful experience, and I do that with my graduate students. And I personally feel that there's no time too early. I think that it's a very useful thing to do. I think that it lets you see kind of what's going on in the field, helps you appreciate the field. I don't know. I started immediately, but I was already used to it because both my graduate and postdoctoral advisors would have me review papers for them, and ask and have me give input. So I think early on, personally.
Yeah, I would agree, but I would sort of maybe just add on that it's good to do it as a mentored process at first, especially as a grad student. I wouldn't want a graduate student mentoring independently, but postdocs I think can start to mentor independently. And I think especially I've had a few postdocs where after I've sort of done like a mentored experience of we both review it and then I submit the reviews, like I'll be happy if I can't review something to send it to them, like say like I can't review it, but you can send it to my postdoc and they'll be able to review it, especially if I know it's really within their expertise. So I think like as a grad student, do some mentored reviews with your PI, and then as a postdoc, you can kind of do a little bit of that, but also start to do some independent reviews. And I think I did maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 independent reviews as a postdoc, and that was really good experience to sort of. I remember that first time getting asked to review a paper, I was like, oh man, this is so exciting. So I think that's a good experience for a postdoc to have. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd be a little cautious about graduate students because there are so many predatory journals out there, and then you really want to make sure that they don't get diverted too much by that. But that at the same time, you want to give them some experience in it. So I think it is a judgment call with the mentor. And but for postdocs are really you know they're really valuable you know, opinion person because they're going to be the most up to date in some cases in a particular niche area that they're developing. So I think it's a really good thing that, you know, you punt to them. I do that a lot. I give them to people that if I don't have time and I know it's a good journal, I'll make sure that they get, you know, they get the email.
And I would
I-
just add on that, just that, like, sometimes I'll do it as like, I'm the formal reviewer and the postdoc just contributes to the review. But I really do think it's also valuable to just decline it and say, but have my postdoc do it, because then the editor gets to know their name and then they get in the system and they can kind of see the process independently. So both are useful experiences, but I think it's good for postdocs to get formally recognized.
I always do it mentored. You know, I mean, I sorry, I didn't make that clear. I don't know. So far, I've always done it mentored, and I warn all my students against predatory journals. Like they'll come to me sometimes and say, "Oh, this journal asked me to review," and I'll look at it and I'll be like, yeah, you don't want to do that.
No, yeah.
Not do that because they will attack
publish
you.
laundry lists. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Margaret. I've got to hop off onto something else. So I really appreciate being invited to the panel, and it's a great series. Congratulations.
Fantastic advice. Thank you all very much. And please do, if you have time, fill out the evaluation. I'll stay on a little longer in case anyone needs to grab the link, but thank you very much.
Yeah, it's fun.
We're all done. Okay.
Bye.
All right. Thank you so much, Margaret. Have a great day.
You too.